Hello and welcome to the MHR podcast. I'm Andy, and for those of you that are familiar with the podcast, you know that every time there is a statement or a budget announced, we're here to reflect upon it and give you some context behind some of the legislation and what that means for businesses and employers. For those of you who follow us will also be more than familiar with Neil. Welcome back, Neil, and thanks for joining us again.
You're welcome.
And this time we're also joined by James from the legislation team. Hi, James. How you doing?
Very good, thanks, Andy.
So you two are going to provide a bit of context about what this budget means for businesses and employers and how that affects them. We need that because they can't rely on me alone. So it was quite an interesting one. I think, obviously, 13 months into Jeremy Hunt being Chancellor, there was a lot of expectations on what he was going to announce. So if it's all right with you guys, I'll just go through some of the headlines we're expecting to hear from the budget, and we can see how much we felt like that he met expectations with what was announced. So he started it with, obviously, he announced just before that he had 110 measures in the autumn statement to keep everyone happy. Topics were expected to be covered were obviously national insurance cuts, minimum wage boosts, business taxes were going to be addressed. There was a few mention of benefit changes, and pensions will rise, but just by how much? Do we feel like those things were covered?
Yeah, I think, as is fairly typical now, a lot of the big headline items tend to be published before the actual statement, so there weren't too many big surprises that we weren't expecting.
Yeah, and not really any curveballs that we kind of came out of nowhere that we didn't expect, I don't think.
No, not really, not this time. Chancellors sometimes do that, but yeah, this one's been pretty well leaked in the past few days.
Brilliant. So what we'll do is then we're going to go into a bit of a deep dive into some of the topics that were discussed, and we can kind of reflect on what that really means for people affected, if that's all right. So first one that came up was one of the first ones was the pension triple lock and benefits raises. What are your thoughts on this?
Again, there was some speculation ahead of the actual speech about whether they would keep with the triple lock for pensions, but they have in this case. So state pension will be increased by 8.5%. And again, there had been speculation around increase to in-work benefits. They've been increased by the inflation rate of 6.7. So yeah, nothing too surprising announced in the actual speech.
Brilliant. So as we had kind of expected then.
Yeah, exactly as expected. The shock would have been if he hadn't done that, to be honest.
Yeah. It was heavily talked about, wasn't it, ahead of the statement?
Yes.
Another thing that was announced, which obviously will affect businesses and employers, depending on how they feel like they want to facilitate these or provide new opportunities in the workplace, is that Hunt announced that there is £50 million towards funding apprenticeships. So again, not much to talk about as such, but also something to be a business to be aware of, that these are things that will be coming in as an opportunity if they're looking at kind of recruitment or new workforce opportunities. So quite an interesting point there. Pension pot reforms. There was some there was mentioned that Hunt is going to consult on some pension pot reforms. What are our views on that?
Well, the principle of that is, at the moment, you as the employer decide what your pension scheme is going to be, and your employees either join it or they don't.
Yeah.
There's no choice. These reforms are to do with letting the employee insist that a new employer pays into their pre-existing pension scheme. So rather than employers just dealing with a single pension scheme of their own choice, they might potentially have to deal with a number of different ones for different employees.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think it's something we're going to have to keep a close eye on, how the consultations go. On face value, if an employee has the right to pick what pension pot gets paid into, it could create quite a big admin burden for business. So it'll be interesting to see if those proposals move forward, how that would happen.
Yeah, because the businesses would have to send money and send information to lots of different pension schemes every month, rather than just one.
Yeah.
And all the schemes have different requirements and different formats and different ways of submitting the data. So, yeah, if you're a large employer, you could end up dealing with a lot of individual pension schemes unless they do something to have some common way of doing it, something like that. But again, that I'm sure that will come out in the consultation.
Yep. So moving away from employees then actually into the self-employed, so Class 2 national insurance paid by self-employed is to be abolished. Not much more else to say really on that, apart from what Hunt said was, we are abolishing Class 2 national insurance altogether, saving the average self-employed person £192 a year. So, yeah.
I mean, that £192 a year, it must be getting to the point where it costs the government almost as much to collect and administer that than they actually raise from it. It's a very small amount of money, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the other thing that was mentioned there just after that was the Chancellor has confirmed that business tax breaks are to be made permanent. What do you guys know about that?
Relatively recently, they introduced what's been called a super deduction for one-off capital expenditure, allowing tax relief for new capital investment. So that is now to be made permanent. So that will be helpful with the intention of encouraging investment of businesses.
Yeah, there we go. So I think Hunt announced that a widely anticipated decision, as you've said, is to be made permanent for full expensing for businesses. So for every £1 that a business invests in its IT, machinery and equipment, it can claim back 25p in corporation tax. So companies can do this in one go, as opposed to having to offset the cost against corporation tax over a longer period. So he said, it means we have not just the lowest headline corporation tax rate in the G7, but the most generous capital allowances, he said. There you go. Otherwise, he's reflected on business rate relief as an extension as well.
Yeah, so again, this is nothing revolutionary, but will probably be welcome news to kind of retail businesses, which this is primarily aimed at. So your high street shops, your pubs. So it's a continuation of existing reliefs for those types of business.
Yeah, supporting the high street.
Absolutely.
Trying to halt the decline.
Well, he's handed here that it will extend 75% discount on business rates up to £110,000. That's a discount for retail and hospitality and leisure businesses for another year as well. Hunt says that these measures will save the average independent shop over £20,000 and the average independent pub over £12,800 a year, he claims. And then, of course, it comes back to kind of like the big ticket items that we were kind of all expecting to talk about that have kind of already been discussed before. So kind of the headline pieces that he wanted to mention in this budget was the national insurance rate cut from 12% to 10%.
Yeah, so there had been some speculation that the cut was going to happen, probably a little bit bigger than we were expecting. I think 1% had been floated, and it's 2%. Probably what took us a little bit by surprise is that that's going to take effect from the 6th of January rather from April. So that will pose some challenges for us from a product point of view, but we've had to deal with similar things in recent years.
Right. Yes, indeed. I mean, it's just something extra that we'll need to do. The slight complication to that is that doing it this way means that there will also be a set of blended percentages for company directors, like there was last year, so they don't benefit from, because they've got an annual earnings period. If nothing was done, they'd benefit from the new rate for the whole of this tax year. So there will be a composite rate for them that makes sure that they don't, basically, that they only benefit to the same extent as everybody else.
So there's a bit of complexity there then to get a head round or kind of to implement, because it isn't exactly what people expected or had already planned for.
No, changing it mid-year makes it more difficult because there's more to do, basically.
Yeah.
Changing at the start of the tax year is just a change of a number,
Okay.
whereas there's some actual calculations to do if you change it in the middle of the year. But as James says, it's something we've done before. Sadly, we had 2 lots of changes in a recent tax year. So it's something we've done before, so it's something we can do again.
So he says here that the change will help 27 million people and means someone on the average salary of £35,000 will save over £450 a year. So that's the impact to those getting paid, I suppose. And then, of course, Hunt also confirmed that minimum wage would rise. This has been talked about quite a lot about different age groups. So there's a bit of uncertainty and a bit of unclarity here on what exactly that meant. But what is your guys' understanding of that?
Well, the headline, the living wage rate's been increased in April to £11.44 an hour, which is slightly more than some people were expecting, because the Prime Minister said a few weeks back it would be at least £11, and the cynics were thinking he's going to make it £11 and a penny, but £11.44 was what the Low Pay Commission recommended, and as they always do, that's been accepted by the government. But yeah, they've also are going to reduce the qualifying age for the living wage from 23 to 21 next April, which again is a long-term commitment. It was expected, so this is really just a confirmation that that's going to happen.
Any comments from yourself, James?
It was, as Neil mentioned, it was the upper end of what the Low Pay Commission had recommended as the increase for the living wage, and with the drop in the age that it's applicable for, for people on lower earnings, it could be quite a big boost for those. However, the reverse to that is any businesses that are having perhaps quite a lot of staff on at or around minimum wage, it's probably going to be quite a big increase for their wage bills to cover that, and they have been kind of talking about decreasing the age at which living wage applies from for quite some time now. So again, probably welcome for some, potentially some additional costs for business, but not unexpected.
So the raise is what? So it's 9.8%, and worth up to £1,800 for a full-time worker at that rate. Hunt says that this decision is the largest ever cash increase of the national living wage. As we've mentioned, it is larger than expected. The higher wage will also be paid. To 21 and 22-year-olds for the first time. At the moment, only workers over 23 receive £10.42 per hour, and he says this will deliver on their manifesto to eliminate low pay. So not too unexpected, like you say, long talked about, just we needed to know the exact numbers. So all in all, I think that's the main headlines in terms of how the business impacts, employer impacts, and what we need to think about in terms of how that's affecting people there. Was it wholly unexpected?
I don't think so. Nothing out of this has been wholly unexpected. I think a few of the details were probably not quite what we were expecting, but across the whole speech, there's nothing particularly exciting. I think he saved the kind of the national insurance announcement right to the end, as that was probably the biggest surprise in terms of it being a 2%, and it applying from this tax year rather than wait until April. But beyond that, probably no big surprises around anything.
And as we kind of tend to see as well, after these things are announced, they usually more of the details are clarified or fleshed out a bit later, and we get a better sense of what the real impact might be. But what are your immediate, from both of you, your takeaways for the main things that maybe businesses and employees need to consider first about the announcements that have been made today?
So, as far as kind of employers are concerned, and from a payroll point of view, the increase to living wage, the change to national insurance, they've also announced extensions to veterans' national insurance relief, and the investment in free ports and investment zones for longer periods. They are continuations of things that are already in place, so aren't really a change as such, but will continue for a longer period of time. They're kind of, from our position as a payroll provider, they're the big ticket items for us.
Right. And yourself, Neil?
Yes, I think businesses are in a position to budget now for these things because they know what these increases to things like living wage are going to be. So they're in a position to put it into the budgets for next year, basically. So it sort of really just confirms things and lets people get on with the job of forecasting costs for next year.
Brilliant. I think that's covered everything, really. I really value your input. Thank you for putting that into context for us. It's helped me understand it, certainly, anyway. So thank you. I'm sure we'll both have you on again very soon as things change and we need an update on that. Hopefully we can plan for when that is. But thank you both for joining us this week. I do appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
If you need to find any more about what we do here at MHR, or if you want to look for any more advice in regards to payroll, in terms of HR, all of these legislation changes, we do position ourselves as experts in that field because of gentlemen like we have here today, but many more pieces of advice that we put out on our Knowledge Hub and our website. Please go to mhrglobal.com. You can check us out on social media. Otherwise, we'll see you next week, and thank you very much.